Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 100 with Brady Colby. So this is a really great episode to be our 100th episode to cover just digital education at large and the kind of global stage, all the things that are happening. Brady just has incredible insights into this space. So I really appreciate him sharing all that he knows, kind of keeping us connected to the pulse of all the latest in this space with online program managers and bootcamp companies and other digital education providers. So really fascinating stuff. Definitely connect with him and the work that he is doing at 32EDU and really appreciate his time here. So without further ado, after this brief message from our sponsor, this is episode number 100 with Brady Colby. This episode is sponsored by Degree.me, a one-stop college research tool for students. If you work for a college or university, you'll want to learn all about their ability to connect you with the right students at a budget-friendly price. To find out more, please visit degree.me/HEG. Super excited to talk with you, just kind of stumbling upon your work on LinkedIn and just kind of excited to learn more about your journey and the work that you're doing here in kind of the OPX space. So yeah, if you want to just kick us off as we always do, just introduce yourself to everyone listening and give a brief overview of your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. So my name is Brady Colby. I am the founder and CEO of 32EDU. I've spent basically my entire professional career in higher ed tech. I had a brief stint at Citibank, but other than that, it's been all in the higher ed tech space. Spent a number of years working for an OPM and been out doing independent research and insights on my own for a little while now. And we also have a joint venture with Holland IQ where we really do deep dive insights onto the OPM, what we call the OPX space.
Right. And I guess you maybe want to give, because I know it's even kind of new to me, maybe just like a brief definition of that term as you sort of get into kind of my next question here, just sort of explaining a little bit more in depth the work that you're doing. Because I think I've definitely seen and heard kind of quite a bit of like where we're at now in kind of digital education and all these companies sort of working with institutions or going kind of their own way with various like boot camps and those sort of things as like a perceived kind of lack of transparency or just like not as much information, I guess, as people are sort of hungry for right now of like, those sort of things. So I know you're kind of working to address that. So, if you just want to talk a little bit more about, how you kind of came to be doing the work that you're doing now with 32EDU and Hollow IQ, and then again, maybe some kind of terminology definitions as well, just to make sure everybody's up to speed.
Yeah. So whatever we say, so historically, the OPM, the online program manager market, it's been kind of strictly defined in one way where one of these organizations like 2U is the best known will come in and have this long relationship where it's a revenue share agreement and they take on a pretty comprehensive bundle of services for the university. But one of the things that's happened over the past 10 years is universities have started doing online programs with support in a lot more of a piecemeal fashion where they'll say, hey, we need some help with digital marketing, but we're really okay with the rest of it. So they will engage a partner that will just do that part. And then they'll say, hey, we need some help with the instructional design and the course scaffolding. And so they'll just get help for that, but they'll handle the rest of it. So the OPM term kind of was understood to be a little bit more strictly defined than is the reality in the market anymore. So the new kind of phraseology would be OPX that we tend to adopt, that it speaks to this industry where things have kind of become really unbundled, and in one instance one service might be provided, but in another instance it's another service, but it's really delivering the same ultimate deliverable of an online program. So that's kind of the term definition there. But how I got into it, I mentioned before that I worked for an OPM, and one of the biggest things that we encountered, like you mentioned, was a real lack of transparency in the market. And a lot of that is because this is really dominated by private companies. 2U is really the only public company. There's a couple other smaller ones that are owned by some public companies, obviously Wiley and Pearson. But outside of that, we get into a whole bunch of companies that are smaller startup type companies that are private and that don't really have any obligation to share any information. And then
Mhm.
accordingly, they don't share any information. Um, and that is compounded by the issues and the lack of comprehensiveness of the iPads data that all the schools report every year. So there was a real need and a real opportunity to say, okay, what's happening in this market? And that was kind of the birth of my company. And it began with aggregating data on who's working with who and what are they doing? Because that's the really big question. What are these companies doing together? And so we came up with some unique methodologies that allowed us to really get comprehensive data on that we haven't really had access to before. So yeah, it started off as trying to address that specific question of nobody really knows or historically has known who was active in this space, what were they doing, who are they working with, and so we developed some methodologies to be able to answer those questions using website metadata and some other deep dive internet search tools that we've developed that have been really fruitful for us.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I was wondering, yeah, if it was limited to just sort of like what these companies and organizations choose to announce, because obviously, like there is, I think, incentive or a pull to do that to be like, hey, look at us, we just have like a new partnership, but yeah, they're under absolutely no obligation to make any sort of announcement. And even then, it might not have all the information that you might be looking for to kind of really gives kind of sophisticated kind of sort of business intelligence for folks to take a look at. So
That's
uh,
exactly right. Yeah. And historically, it was pretty limited to the announcements. And that really misses out on a large part of the industry that doesn't want to announce things because we talked about the transparency and we saw this kind of bubble up in 2019 where a lot of the providers started getting some flack because the way that they would present programs would be sort of trying to minimize their own involvement in it. And so obviously they just wanted to present this as this is the school's program. We're not involved, whatever. Not necessarily directly saying they weren't involved or anything, but just
mhm.
trying to come in and fulfill that service and present it as much from from the university as possible. And so it got really hard to know who was doing what whenever it was a strategic thing to not want prospective students to know that there was somebody else involved in the delivery of the program. And I had always kind of thought that there was no reason to have that approach because I don't think that has jeopardized the quality of the programs at all. We see a lot of the highest ranked programs, online programs every year are these supported programs. So I never really saw a lot of benefit from kind of keeping that information guarded. So aggregating and starting to put out that information has been one of the core things my business does.
Yeah. Yeah, having kind of experience in this space as well, it always makes me think of kind of like a Wizard of Oz situation of like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of thing. But like,
Yeah, yeah, really
um,
accurate.
yeah, so like, yeah, that's kind of like the metaphor. But I think, yeah, it has changed because I know even when I was, I was like working with students who might kind of surmise, eventually, and like you would never lie, but you would never sort of like, show your cards just sort of like out of nowhere because you want to, yeah, like you're kind of saying, almost like keep this sort of, I don't know, yeah, just kind of like smoke and mirrors of like it is the institution's program, which of course it is, but like just never make any sort of second guessing because several could, go through the entire, students could go through the entirety of the program and then at the end be like, oh my gosh, I never even knew. And it's like, that's what we wanted. Like we wanted to just be so, seamless and just be, really good.
Which makes sense to me. There's definitely an allure to that. I don't see any problem with doing that. It just made it difficult for market research.
Right. Yeah. And I think I guess maybe it got to sort of its furthest extent of sort of like the lack of transparency and those sort of
Yep,
things. So now it's kind of recoiling back. So, which I think is
exactly.
good. So, with all this being said and everything that you're kind of plugged into, and you kind of mentioned, obviously there's been, and we can dig in a little bit more with like the trends or the changes or whatever. But I guess, yeah, I'll frame the first question this way of just sort of like what's been catching your eye lately in the digital education space. Certainly, a lot has been going on in the past several months of all these pivots to online education for institutions. But yeah, I guess with all of that, maybe just what's been catching your eye that you'd want to give sort of a some further emphasis on.
Sure. There's a couple things that I would make note of. One is just the amount of money that's flowing into the space right now. Just a couple days ago, Emeritus and Eruditus had another $113 million round. And it's just the kind of money that this segment hasn't really seen before. So there's just tons of money flowing to these sectors. And then the next thing I would say is the internationalization. Just this morning, there was an announcement that Northwestern University was partnering with, it's called Great Learning out of India to do a master's in data science. And so we're starting to see a lot of schools really become aware of these international markets. And we see new providers popping up that are specifically taking these online programs internationally because typically the OPMs, OPX providers have serviced domestic markets. We saw Learning House reports for years that talked about how, half of online students are within 50 miles of the university. And now we see a number of providers that say, well, that was just happening by default. That's just because that's what they were aware of. And so now we see these providers saying, there's another one called Uni Online and saying, hey, we'll take your program to China. Same thing that Beacon Education does. And ones like Great Learning that partner with U.S. universities and take programs to India. Same with Upgrad. So we see a lot of these companies that are saying, you're not limited to that geography. You're not even limited to a domestic audience. Let's go to the other side of the world, even. So a lot of internationalization taking place, a lot of money coming in for that because there's a lot more potential students. And then uh, I would also point to kind of the coming together of the boot camp in the OPM space, the OPX space,
Mhm.
where 2U's got Trilogy. Wiley has, whenever they bought the Learning House, Software Guild came with it, and then they also purchased M3. Kaplan and Metis. We've got Zovio and Full Stack Academy. I mean, it just goes on and on to where everybody's starting to realize that these are really complementary services, and it makes a lot of sense. So, kind of the bringing together of those two industries is kind of at the beginning, but it's something that's really noteworthy right now, and it gives these providers another way that they can serve institutions.
And actually, now that you mentioned some of those, I'm curious your take because I feel like it's similar to some of those, but like I guess I don't know what maybe like the long term strategy, like how it makes sense is Chegg when they like, acquired Thinkful.
Yeah,
How do you see it? Because I guess like it might just be like, oh, it's a nice to have, like yeah, like boot camps are, but like because I think it is for other ones. I guess it makes more sense to me of like yeah, like an OPM acquires a boot camp company and that's just like it kind of expands the reach into more institutional partners and those sort of things, but like I'm not sure how like a book rental company owning a boot camp company, like how that exactly kind of works, I guess. But I guess yeah, I'm curious your take on that one in particular.
I totally agree, and that one's always been kind of an outlier in my mind too. But then one of the things that kind of started to make it make sense a little bit more was last month they launched their portal for, um, I guess, lead aggregation for online programs for community colleges. So that kind of started spinning my wheels on where that could all fit together, was because now they're kind of fulfilling a digital marketing function for community colleges, and that's where that can be complementary in the future. I don't know that that's what their strategy is, but that whenever I saw that, that was the thing that made the most sense with how it could interplay with the boot camp, the Thinkful boot camp. Otherwise, I kind of thought the same thing, that it was a nice to have and kind of a perspective buy, and they wanted to have their something that might be a little bit forward looking. But also the other thing that I'm just kind of thinking about now is the ownership of the curriculum and the content, where the boot camps own, and they bring the curriculum to the university. They bring, the teachers in a lot of instances. And so owning the content and owning the books kind of makes a lot of sense in my head. We see a lot of things popping up now where we're not really differentiating a textbook from a course anymore. And so I can kind of see a long term future there, but we just haven't really seen anything come together there with him.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely like kind of a wild card of like some like interesting implications and potential, but no idea what way like they'll choose to take it or what actually would work out. But because
Yeah.
I guess yeah, what it also it kind of makes me think of like sort of another trend because I guess Thinkful reminded me of like 'cause I think it's Thinkful with I'm forgetting the like the matching, but like Thinkful and Kenzie both are partnering with like I think it was Western Governors and
Yep.
Southern New Hampshire, and that sort of idea of like those types of like digital education companies have been around for long enough now and proven themselves, and it seems as though they're sort of like plugging in to institutions and kind of tethering themselves to those in some way of like a pipeline. And because I think in my head, it over the past couple of years felt like it was just its own island of like, yep, there's these like digital education companies and no way connected with any institution, any credential that's like, with a accredited institution. It's like, well, that's fine. That just provides like a different experience for somebody if they're
Mhm.
looking for that. But like the fact that they're being like, well, you could actually parlay these into credits towards like another program or whatever, like I just found that very intriguing as just another sort of like, I don't know, like institutions are so deeply rooted and still like I would say have a lot of brand awareness or a lot of value and those sort of things. Like, I don't know, like it would be like an additional sell to somebody like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to go through this boot camp because I would have the option to potentially move forward for further credentials and those sort of things. So I found that to
Yeah,
be
and that's
interesting.
something that's just now starting to happen also. We saw the big announcement with 2U and Arcadia where the 2U and Trilogy in conjunction with Arcadia are essentially offering a boot camp this fall that students anywhere can take, and Arcadia is crediting the program, so it essentially just replaces a semester. And then, like you mentioned, with Thinkful and Kinsey Academy, them saying or Western Governors now saying, okay, we'll accept those programs for credit. It's been kind of a long time coming, but I think that's the other part where it kind of makes sense with Chegg that it's all about um, cheaper course materials. And if you kind of view that more broadly, the credits are, a byproduct of the course. So they're just saying, hey, we can get you credits. We can help get credits by, or we can help decrease costs by, getting you cheaper resources. We can help you get you more credits by a program that you can take to your university, whatever it may be. So yeah, we're starting to see more and more of those. Like LSU started recognizing AWS certificates as credit for some of their programs too.
Mhm.
So it's been kind of a long time coming.
Yeah. Um, yeah, just a lot of interesting, yeah, developments there. And I guess if it's, obviously in addition to kind of just what we talked about with sort of the unbundling of services has been like a big change recently, but anything else that you feel like has like changed a lot that you'd want to kind of note as sort of just maybe like another trend where like it was definitely established one way and we're moving away from that to into new territory? Because I think, there's definitely been and like to you kind of like kind of heralded this like big wave of digital education and doing it I think like a certain way, but like they were the monolith, all or nothing kind of model. And I think now like the unbundling sort of is maybe because of that. So yeah, I'm just curious anything that you're aware of is like other kind of big changes that you've observed.
The unbundling would be one of them. The other thing that I would point to would be the smaller, shorter credentials and the stackable
Mm.
credentials. That's a pretty big one. That's something that's really been aided by internationalization. So a lot of other countries will have different definitions of credentials, and so not having the standard credential framework, and we go international. Uh, it doesn't necessarily mean as much to have a quote unquote master's degree in another country if a master's degree isn't as big of a deal in that country. So it makes sense to kind of break those programs up and have more entry points and more exit points. So we're seeing a ton more activity with these smaller credentials. We're seeing a lot of the money in the market flow to the providers of those. Like I mentioned, Eruditus and Emeritus just got $113 million, and they exclusively work in these shorter credentials. We see in the MOOC space just tons of money flowing in these shorter
Mm.
credentials. I see a lot of universities on their own creating step in and step out points and badges that you accrue over the course of the program. That really helps if a student isn't able to complete the whole program and then isn't arbitrarily told that they're not qualified for the workforce because they didn't complete their gen ed requirements. So, we see a lot of these better routes to really attributing the learning that a student has achieved, and micro credentialing has been the way that that's happened.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, there's just like so much to talk about because I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Of just like, yeah, like short courses and stuff, which I've personally benefited from recently because I'm like, kind of scratching the itch of, learning something. And it's also, in a lot of, especially for like the Coursera's, like they've been around for a while and also just like are at least able to imprint on, any kind of short course of just like, hey, this is taught by this faculty from this place. And then like, yeah, just those pathways of like, if you complete all of these short courses, then that leads you towards, a certificate from, a, an institution. So, yeah, that's definitely, and I think that's like, yeah, it's just hit its like point of maturity, I guess. Maybe that's like the biggest thing.
That's exactly what the boot camp providers were doing initially, anyways, and now it's just being applied to other segments outside of full stack development. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you kind of brought up again because I wanted to like kind of sit with the international aspect because yeah, I think that's like a huge thing that and just give just you kudos. Like you have been somebody who's like bringing that up a lot more. Like as I'm going through, to hop on LinkedIn, I'll see you sharing this information out, and I was completely unaware of it. But yeah, it's such a huge like I think another kind of coming wave is that opportunity because obviously that's the potential of like, yeah, you build like an online degree program or any of these things, like it could be accessible to anybody in the world. That's always been part of the like kind of pitch, I guess, but I think it's in my experience or just, kind of anecdotally, it's obviously so hard for a like US based organization with US based employees who may not speak another language or those sort of things to be like, yeah, we can like recruit and like work with people in, any country in the world and those sort of things. So like that is like fascinating just seeing, yeah, like these other companies kind of gain traction or just sort of start to signal or it's like, hey, there is another way. Like we obviously are here. We understand how to like, reach out and market to these potential students and those sort of things for like a US based program. Because it could be, especially now, with the pandemic where it's like, yeah, I mean, we've been able to like get a program going, but we obviously like absolutely need help to like broaden the reach in whatever way, we need, or just like, yeah, any of those again, sort of like unbundled services or whatever, just any of these things that could be, that these international companies are able to just like, yeah, you've got everything set. That's great. We will just help you to like market and do any sort of like, enrollment advising and any of those sort of things. So,
Yeah, people really forget how important it is to have people in a localized market that understand that market. Um, if you're going to market something to somewhere and you've never been there, it's you're going to have a lot harder time than someone that has been there and operated there their entire life. So everybody's really starting to realize that you really have to have localized expertise to scale globally.
yeah, it's good. Good advice. So, obviously we've just talked a lot about, like what's happening, the work that you're doing to kind of help kind of pull all this together, synthesize it and those sort of things. So just to you can kind of sit with like why this is all so important, like the transparency, allowing, people to just kind of to understand more of what's going on. Yeah, just to kind of hear it from you, like to you, what makes this work so important? I guess you could say it maybe like on the institutional side and or like, any of these companies and stuff, like why do you feel like this is so important to like put in all like the time and the energy to keep up with everything and put
Sure.
it together?
Yeah. So from the institutional side, what I saw in the past 10 years was that by and large, most of the information that a university gets. Let's step back. Let's say a university decides that they're going to do some online programming and they decide that they need help. So they put out an RFI or RFP and they start getting information from some providers. Well, the only information that they're going to have on those providers for the most part is what those providers put in those proposals. Just in the interest of making better decisions, you have to have more information. If if I'm going to buy a car and the only thing that I know about the car is what the salesman tells me, I'm less equipped to make a good decision than if I do independent research on my own at home and are able to look at things from a different perspective than what the salesman's giving me. So the first thing that's needed to do that is the data. So first you've got to create this data that just is an underlying framework for people to do their own research and ask their own questions and do their own investigation and just be aware of who's active in the market and who they could even possibly reach out to for help. So for the institution side, just being aware of the fact that there is other information available that you can have before you embark on a multi-year contract that has pretty significant revenue
Mhm.
dollars attached to it, I think is something that is in the best interest of the industry all the way around, where everybody is more firm in their decision with the contract that they sign at the end because they more information has been brought to the table. So it gives the institutions a lot more power and a lot more security, and it also uh, tells them a lot more about who they're working with. So I think it's a huge benefit for the institutions. For the provider side, I tend to think of it like if you look at consumer goods, there's Nielsen data that you can look at every which way and slice and dice, and every provider has it. And if you're going to go into a sales conversation as a consumer provider, as a consumer goods company, you have to have this syndicated data because it's the most comprehensive statement about what's going on in the market. And so, uh, for them to be able to say, we're going to commit money to this space, but we don't really know exactly what's going on. We just kind of have a gut feeling. Uh, I think we need to be kind of past that point as an industry. So it's being able to give them security in the decisions that they're making, being able to tell them where the market is headed, what kind of things that they should be doing differently, where their head should be for the future, and where opportunities lie. So it's a huge value add for them, and tells them not only what the industry is doing, but kind of where they stand relative to the industry. And then it's also finally valuable for the students. If we're asking students to take on a significant amount of debt, or we're asking them to spend a lot of money, I would want to be as transparently dealt with as possible if I was, spending 50, $100,000. So I would want to know as much
Mhm.
information as
Mhm.
possible. So I think it's kind of in everybody's best interest to kind of lay the cards out on the table, and that's kind of what we try to do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely very valuable. Because yeah, I mean, it's just like it would, help build that trust between, an institution and provider, which like obviously is just like so hard to build and easy to break kind of thing. So like if you are kind of, maybe overblowing your successes or something, and then like, the institution feels like they're not getting what what they were promised, and that just can make everything way harder. And then certainly, yeah, at the end of the day, like students would suffer if there's like a bad partnership that was like, forged under maybe false pretenses or something, and then like they're not working together well. Like, yeah, it just ends up being bad for everybody. So as long as, yeah, like, because that information is like circulating and all that, you would hope that it would really get to that point to be better for everybody, which, yeah, I mean, I'd absolutely believe that, that would be the case. Cause I think it also makes me think of just sort of like, yeah, that idea of being like, yeah, an institution kind of shopping around, like they can check in on like just kind of more objective information and just see who is more kind of like trusted and verified or sort of vetted and those sort of things. And, um, you know, knowing that kind of like there is a little bit of like a light on you as like a provider, as a company, you're gonna be like, okay, well, we need to like really do our due diligence and really do the best work that we can and all that, versus kind of just trying to like, I don't know, like, just kind of skirt by or something. I don't know. Like, it just made me think of all that kind of just like the trust, just like it just really would help with that, to build that trust and build better partnerships. So,
Yeah, yeah, and trust is one of the things that, we're really trying to build as we adopt online education more and more. One of the kind of big underlying problems between students and the institutions is, they're still working on fully trusting them to be able to deliver the same quality content via online. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to build trust, more information is always better.
absolutely. And I guess really quick, just to kind of give it its kind of kind of due diligence here. So, we are recording this September 1st, 2020. Things are changing all the time, but just as we've seen the global pandemic persisting, have you seen, obviously, of course, like a lot of institutions pivoting into, digital education out of necessity, but yeah, just anything noteworthy that you feel like is really tied to just sort of the disruptions of the global pandemic that you'd want to talk through?
Yeah. So there's kind of three main sectors that we look at that are all really closely related, and that's the OPX segment, the boot camp segment, and then the pathways, the international pathways providers. And that at first might not make a lot of sense to people, but then you think about what's happened in light of COVID-19, that these international pathway providers have almost entirely flipped to become OPMs, at least in the short term. A lot of them are thinking about doing that in a more permanent fashion, but some are hoping to go back to a little bit more business as usual. But that segment where Shorelight or Study Group or something has a partnership with a certain university to recruit students for a certain program. Well, if all of that programming is online now, well, that's basically become an OPM relationship. So those are the three kind of main segments that we target. And obviously, the biggest hit has been in the pathways providers, because that segment's been, it's really tied to how easily people can flow between countries, and what's the visa situation, how easy is travel, all those kind of factors. And so that's obviously been one of the most difficult segments to be in right now, which is why we saw the huge pivot towards them basically functioning as OPMs. But with the OPMs, it's things have definitely ticked up a little bit and sped up a little bit, but we see a lot more coming from what I call these platform-based providers. So like Coursera, they have their platform where everything comes. edX, they have their edX platform where everything comes through. So we're seeing these providers, Emeritus even that we just saw, everything comes through this one centralized platform. We're seeing a ton of traction with those, and a lot of success. So we're seeing good growth, even accelerated growth after the pandemic in the OPM space, and then also the boot camp space has just been on a tear. So that's been one of the there's just partnerships happening, multiple partnerships a week. So that segment's just been in real hyper growth.
Yeah, which is interesting because I guess it's like you wouldn't, or I guess to me, I wouldn't have guessed that maybe any one segment more than another would have grown quicker. I just would say like, yeah, digital education is going to, maybe accelerate its growth out of, again, kind of necessity, a trend that was already happening. But yeah, it's interesting. I guess because people would want to, maybe like the smaller things are more appealing because it might be quicker to kind of get off the ground, or would kind of fill that gap of students who do like defer. They could still do something. So they're seeing maybe like higher demand there. But
Yeah, so there's a few
yeah.
reasons. So one is that it's cheaper for the university. So the
Mhm.
university's not having to go through digitizing an online MBA, right? That can be an expensive process, going through spinning up the infrastructure with the professors, and digitizing the courses, and building out the admissions systems for everything. That can be costly. But with the case of a boot camp, the infrastructure, the content even is already put together. They can come to the university and say, "Hey, we've got this short, hyper outcomes focused program. Um, it's almost plug and play for you. There's not a lot of upfront spend for the university or ongoing spend. I don't believe so. So it's a lot cheaper for them to spin up these programs. And as we know, everything is really hypersensitive to outcomes. These are programs this is an industry that evolved because it's hyper focused on outcomes. So it kind of makes sense when you think about that it's kind of the low hanging fruit of, what's the situation now? Situation is schools need to have a lot better outcomes, and they need to do something without spending a lot of money. Well, the first solution for that is a boot camp. So
Mm. Yeah, well, with that context, it does make a lot of sense. So as we kind of start to wrap up, I'm curious, anything that you are reading, watching, and or listening to that you'd want to recommend, so we can kind of put it as some homework for folks in the show notes.
Let's see. Oh man, I've that is tough. I've got a ton of the blogs that I go to. Most of my life is just going through these filters and RSS feeds and checking the blogs and so let me see. There was a new really good blog that I just came across related to pathways that was called Across the Bridge. So that one's been really fruitful. Looking at stuff over in Australia, there's a really great newsletter slash blog thing called Campus Morning Mail that has a ton of good information. Um, those are a couple of the ones that I think people probably don't know a lot about. That they put out some pretty good content pretty routinely. Um, Outside of that, it's a lot of the basic sources with EdSurge, TechCrunch, um, just a lot of the basic sources that you usually see. So those two would be two that I would mention.
Great. Yeah. Cause yeah, I don't know. I guess cause yeah, I mean, I've been following EdSurge for a while, but I'm still not sure, like maybe if everybody knows, especially like institution based folks, since it is a little more relevant to
Yeah.
all of us in ed tech. So, um,
Oh yeah, and then I would say, in light of that, it's kind of my sales pitch, but that the platform that I operate is called IO by 32edu, so it's just 32edu.io, and so what it is that it's a subscription service. It's a platform that you log into, and we go out and we comb through all of the sources, and throw in a little blurb about why a particular article is interesting or why it's relevant for you. So that it's hard for me to answer what I'm reading because that's kind of what my platform is that we go out and we read everything and we tell you, okay, this is what you should be reading and why it's important. So yeah.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense because it's like everything. That's what I've been
Yeah,
reading
exactly.
lately. um, so, um, well, then we will end as we always do on an optimistic note. So, kind of take this as you will. But what are you looking forward to in your job, your life, and or the world? So, any of those things, all of those things, but just anything that you are looking forward to. Obviously, it's we can all use a little optimism. So, yeah, anything that you are looking forward to.
Our daughter just started to crawl, and so she will be walking and talking soon. So that is something we're very much looking forward to.
Yes, I have a 4-month-old as of the recording of this, so
You're about 2 months
yeah, we
away.
have,
Yep.
yeah, we're close by behind you there. So yeah, and it's incredible just to sort of like sit here for a second, like just the development of human beings, like watching it in real time is
No,
just fascinating.
it
So
is.
cool. Well, thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did. And absolutely, obviously, your platform there, 32edu, is such a great resource and everything. So definitely encourage folks to check that out and just connect with you as well. Obviously, to keep up with what you're working on, but just really appreciate your time and all the great context and information that you shared for the episode here.
Thank you so much, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.